Livingston, how are you?
Good.
Long
Uh,
time no see. How's things?
things are busy. I'm trying to organize some of the crap of my world here, and it's the standard stuff. Let's see. I think most of the time you blur the backgrounds of your the interviewees. Is that your preferred method?
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay. Okay, and let me clear a little clutter off my desktop. I'm gonna try and log off of stuff that might pop up and break my train of thought. So easily broken.
I've always got to do that every time I do one of these things and record it. I got to close emails and Teams
Yeah,
and everything else because as soon as something pops up, you can't help but looking at it. Oh, that's on my mind now.
yeah. Okay. So let's see. I'm trying to think. Way back when, EVONA helped us recruit some of our people that we have on board today, and I didn't realize you had this part of the business, if you will,
Yeah,
back then. So
yeah,
tell me about your construct, if you will. That's
yeah, absolutely. So I started the podcast probably 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago,
yeah,
something like that, and it actually it caught momentum a lot bigger and better and faster than what I thought it was going to. And like everything else, business life got in the way, and there was a bit of a hiatus from the first season. This is sort of second season release, if you like. And we got up to on the first season, we got up to around about excuse me, I think it was about 41 episodes. And it was on Spotify, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. But our following since then has tripled. So LinkedIn, we've got over 300,000 followers now. X, we got 15,000. We've got a monthly newsletter where this podcast gets sent called Space Minds, which has got 71,000 subscribers. And then at the time will tell with this new season, but the first season at the time we were averaging around about 5,000 downloads per episode on Spotify. So it gained all this traction really quickly, which I wasn't expecting. And then,
yeah,
like I say, business life got in the way and all that kind of stuff. And I'm bringing it back now. But the whole purpose of it was to make excuse me make space more accessible for everyone. A part of the onboarding here at EVONA, so when we hire people as to work for us, one of the things we make them go through is that you probably have something equivalent to this in the United States, but here it's called STEM Ambassador Program. So it's a government initiative. You enroll in it. It's all online. And it means that you get given the STEM Ambassador badge, if you will. And it means that within a 12-month period, you need to basically hold around 5 STEM events. And for us, of course, that's talking about space. So we go into schools, colleges, university, and we'll talk about space to try and demystify the space sector, if you will. I don't know about you. I've only been doing this 7 years, but when I speak to friends, family now, as soon as I say space, straight away the perception is astronauts, rocket scientists, astrophysicists. So we're trying to kind of break that mold, if you will, and tell the stories of great, co-founder space leaders like yourselves about, what was your story? How did you get into space? And it's so interesting. There's so many different, sometimes unconventional stories of how people got into space. So yeah, that's the message.
wow, I'm impressed. I'm not a big podcast listener, um, and so it's almost like there's a space out there that is large, but I didn't even know. You're in a house, you open a door and look in a room, you go, my God, I didn't know this was a grand ballroom in here.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of stuff out there that I think people listen to as they drive, as they work, as they
Yeah.
run or work out, whatever. And I never I don't have a good sense of the size of that audience, but I think what you're finding is that the audience is large, when it comes to space topics, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's trying to just get more people involved. Again, the whole purpose, like when I go to these space events in the US,
Yeah,
or when I go to, satellite in DC, symposium in Colorado, whatever, everyone kind of has that. It's not a massive concern, but it's just like a thought in the back of the head that space is growing, which is great. There's so much more VCP now flowing into space startups. There's more space startups coming, especially out of the US. It's not really getting any easier to find the talent to sustain that growth. Sooner or later,
Talent is hard.
we're probably going to run out of people, and that's not just
Yeah,
technical as well, by the way. I know we're
yeah,
talking about engineers there. Space policy, law, sales,
yep,
operations, everything. So this
yeah,
is to try and, like I say, spread that message of like, hey,
yeah.
space is for everyone.
The one observation I have is that as the technological universe expands, kind of like our universe, it's accelerating, and you'll have pockets of expertise, excuse me, that grow faster than the rest, but there's other things that are left behind, like you mentioned, space policy, space law, things like that. The regulatory environment, that's going to be the toughest part to catch up, because regulatory work is typically reactive.
Yeah,
They're very rarely proactive. Well, I think this could exist in the future, therefore I'll create a regulation about it. That's not how we tend to regulate stuff. We don't regulate stuff that doesn't exist yet, by and large. And so somebody will invent somebody who says, well, is that safe? Well, I've got a rule that says these things need to be safe. And how does that apply to me? Well, you don't fit in any of the categories I have, so I'm going to create a new category. And now I've got a new category. I have to have folks in that category that can actually regulate you, that actually understand what you do. Oh, you just invented this, so the only person that really understands it is you. Oh, I'm kind of in a pickle to regulate you, who just invented something, that I
yeah,
need to make sure is going to be safe. So
yeah,
therefore, you have to go through an education process with me to help me understand what it is you do, so I can, pass judgment on you to determine whether or not what you're doing is safe. That is tough. That is tough, and uh, we we see, the aviation community do this up until just recently, very repeatedly, very safely. We see things, and it's because we stay within a narrow band, and we don't allow too many excursions beyond that band. And that band is the band of success. So if there's a failure, we say, okay, what happened to cause that failure? We then, if it's a regulatory thing, or it's an environmental thing, or it's a mechanical, electrical thing, we can say, here's what we should do to take that from this excursion back into the safe zone.
yeah,
We're going to limit the number of flights because we were putting too many in the same place. We're going to require that this material be tested because we found that it had a flaw in it that was undetected because we didn't have that test in our rules. We found that the pilots were tired, and so now we're going to implement a rule that says pilots have to have so much crew rest. So or the weather was too bad, so we're going to say you can't fly in these weather conditions, or the minimums of this aircraft have to be changed because this is what it can really do. So we do all this because we've got experience, and now when we try to regulate space, we're um, we don't have that expertise,
yeah,
and but we want it to be as safe as, say, aviation. So it's
yeah,
a real conundrum. This is a toughie. This is a toughie.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. And
Okay.
I guess on that on that note, it'd be great in terms of what we've been talking about there, and kind of spreading the message. It'd be great if you could, I guess, kick us off talking about where you started, early days of Livingston, talks where you started in life, where you grew up, school, college, that sort of
Yeah.
thing, and kind of how you found your way into your early career. And I think it was the US military and
Yeah.
Boeing.
Yeah. So I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and um, I had three older sisters, and my dad worked for I think at the time, like, Great Lakes Insurance Company, and uh, you know I was born in 1956. So back then, if you were black and you wanted house insurance or home insurance or other, you weren't always well served by the broader insurance industry. And so Black Industries created their own insuring entities as well. And so my father and his father both worked in real estate and insurance. And so that was kind of a Black community event. As a matter of fact, I remember going to the African American Museum in Detroit and finding a picture of my grandfather there, because he was responsible for supporting Black enterprise development in Detroit, and had quite a number of properties, et cetera. So I was like, there's granddad, wow. And so that's where we started. But my dad moved to Louisville, Kentucky, to join a company called Mammoth Life, and he was the assistant treasurer of the company. And so the family moved from Detroit to Louisville, and that's actually where I started first grade. So I did kindergarten in Detroit, first grade in Louisville, and went through grade school there at a little Catholic school, Christ the King. So I went through grade school there. Now I was planning to go to Flagey High School, which was run by the brothers of Flagey, staying in the Catholic school system, but they fell on financial hard times and ended up closing. So I ended up going to public school, and ended up being bused across town to Highland Junior High School, and then eventually Atherton High School. Well, being bused across town, the west end of town was mostly Black. The east end was predominantly white, and so they wanted to get some integration going, and I was a recipient of that. So I ended up in a really good school on the east side, and I had no idea of the fact that the kids around me came from a generally more affluent area. I just knew these houses were nice, and our house was nice, but I didn't realize that the overall balance of things was a little bit different, and that the schools over there had more to offer. So I started school there. There was a opportunity to do some programming on a computer, so I would come in early. I already had to take a bus early. It was dark most of the time when I got on the bus to drive all the way across town. But I would go and open up the computer lab, and so I would start writing programs. And one of my first programs was an orbital mechanics program. And so I was calculating the period of an orbit and give you the eccentricity and altitudes and stuff like that, because I could find the math somewhere, and so I programmed it. And so I had kind of a unique exposure, and the computer lab at our school was like an old broom closet that had a phone line, and so the phone line talked via modem to a computer downtown. So this wasn't a modern computer. There was no screen. It was a teletype machine, and so anything that you wanted to see had to be printed on paper. So you had to figure out how to make X's in the go in the shape that you wanted. So that was kind of my first exposure, and I kind of liked this stuff. And when I was in grade school, Sister Pauline kept the solar system model out in the back of the classroom longer, I think, than that lesson period, because I was just fascinated by it, and I was always spending time with it. So she kind of they kind of fed my curiosity by allowing a little more time with my space topic. And same thing in high school. They would let me actually open up. They'd give me the keys, and I'd open up the computer lab and spend my time early in the morning doing that work. And so in each step of the way, I had a little bit of support and encouragement from the educational system, if you will, to kind of pursue stuff I was interested in. But I did, normal stuff in high school. I ran track and cross country. I played trumpet in the high school band. We did some marching band stuff. I was in a couple of science clubs. We had a science club. We had a model rocket club. I think I was president of the science club, and maybe the model rocket club, and we had a model airplane club. And so we were, so it was kind of sciencey, geeky stuff. But I was loving every minute of it and had a lot of fun, and got good support from the school, and eventually graduated from Atherton High School, and got an appointment to the Air Force Academy. I knew I wanted to do space, so the only places I applied to had like astro programs. I applied to University of Cincinnati. Neil Armstrong was teaching there at the time. I applied to MIT. I applied, I think, to University of Michigan in the Air Force Academy, and all these places had astro programs, and I got accepted every place. But I needed to make a decision that made sense for me and the family. And my sister was going through college and then going on to med school. I was saying there's no way that she's going to be able to do med school and I'm going to be able to do college at the same time. In the academy, space, airplanes, oh, that sounds pretty good. And the fastest path to possibly being an astronaut, because I got to watch all the moon landings and all that. And so I kept track of all of that stuff. And I said, yeah, and that's a full ride scholarship. Totally, we can do that. And so I accepted the nomination to the Air Force Academy and became an astronautical engineering major, because now this is my dream, right?
Yeah.
And it was just brutally difficult. I was like, holy smokes, I don't think I'm prepared for this. So it was as hard as I'd ever worked in my life to just keep even, at the academy. But it's what I really wanted to do. And I remember flunking. We had 2 different levels of differential equation classes for my major, and I flunked the second level. I barely got out of the first one, and then I got to level 2 and I flunked it. And so I had an academic review board at the academy, and this is like da da da. All these colonels lined up, and they're at this long table with the department head at the far end, or the vice dean, or somebody really important. And all these full colonels lined up, and there was a lieutenant colonel in the corner, I think, taking notes. And I'm going, so the lieutenant colonel is in the corner, and I'm a cadet. And so all these people were terrifying because they were way, way, way senior to me. And the kid who went in just before me came out shaking like a leaf. He was sweaty, he looked terrible, and I heard them yelling at him. And I was going, oh my goodness, this is the end of me. This is the end. And so I walk in, and they're all looking at each other, and then they turn like in unison toward me and smile. And I was going, oh, you bastards, you're enjoying this. This is fun for you. You're going to slice me up, and this is fun for you. And they said, Cadet Holder, we've talked to all your instructors, and they all say that you're a good and diligent student. You try really hard. But the consistent theme is you don't ask questions, and it seems that when there's something you don't understand, you just let it go by. Well, let us make sure that you believe or understand that usually if you ask a question, there's 1/3 to 2/3 of the class that wants to ask the same question. So just do that. So just don't let it go by. You tested out of a semester of chemistry. I was good in chemistry, and so you have a slot in your schedule to take this course over again. Would you like to stay as an astronautical engineering major? And I'm in a brace, yes, sir. And they say, well, good. We'd like you to, and we're going to support you in that endeavor. And you're gonna reaccomplish this course. It's going to be a different section, a different instructor with a different text, and we're going to wish you the best of luck and really focus on this, and good luck with your career. And I was like, that turned out different than I expected. And so I became really, really, really diligent. And I had to balance where my time was. I was killing it in computer science because I was spending all this time, but I said, okay, I can accept a lower grade in computer science, but I've got to get through the differential equations work. And so I had to balance, and I was not the greatest student. Studying was hard. The material was hard. And so I just had to spend more time on target than to just get through it. And my freshman year, I went to church every morning, and they called us the God Squad. And I've told people this, but I said, I went with a very simple prayer every morning. I asked for one more day. I said, oh, Lord, please give me one more day, because it was just so hard. I could only see, what was right in front of me, and I just needed the next day to keep going. And so I ended up being in the choir, so I spent a lot of time at church, traveling, etc. But I did graduate with my degree in astronautical engineering, and I made it through, and I was like, huh, okay, you actually did get through this. And when assignments came out, you could go to an operations base, you could go to like an office that's managing overall systems, or you could, and I said, well, let me go to I'd like to do an operations base. So Vandenberg was launching rockets, and I figured that was a good place to start in your career, was launching rockets. And I got the assignment and went off to Vandenberg Air Force Base, and eventually became a launch officer for classified satellites, for the NRO. And at the time, the NRO was not publicly revealed, so there was, I was just an Air Force guy launching Air Force satellites,
Yeah.
and I did well at that, and I really enjoyed it. And so this program came up. It was called the Manned Spaceflight Engineering Program, and you had to be a certain time and grade and all this to apply. And I was below the minimums. I was still a first lieutenant, I think, when I applied. But I filled out the application and sent it in. It was only being sent to DoD personnel because they wanted manned spaceflight engineers to go on shuttle missions that were carrying DoD-specific payloads. Many of them classified. And so I applied, and I got this phone call back from the I think he was the head of the selection committee as colonel, and he said, and can you tell, when you're talking to somebody on the phone, they're smiling on the other end. You can't see their face, but you can tell they're smiling.
Yeah.
This colonel, I think, must have been smiling, and he said, you aren't senior enough to apply to the program. And I said, yes, sir, I'm aware of that. And he said, but it looks like you got a real good career track going. So we're going to ask for more applicants in about a year. And at that time, you will actually have enough time and grade and seniority in the Air Force to apply. So I would recommend you apply again. And we're going to keep you on file. It was a very polite conversation, but I achieved my goal. I got at least noticed, and I made it into the first round that I was eligible for. So that was Cadre 2 of the Manned Spaceflight Engineering Program. So I had a blast. I was assigned to I was still at Vandenberg, but I was going to be reassigned to SMC, Space and Missile Systems Center, and I got to go off and fly in T-38s. I got to put on spacesuits. I did neutral buoyancy training. I did remote manipulator training. Went to the Air Force Test Pilot School, and they set up a program for us and made it to the Flight Test Engineer Test Pilot School program. I was having a blast. This was it's like, okay, I got my shot. I couldn't make it as a pilot because my eyes were bad, but I've got a shot because I had focused on my work at Vandenberg on being as good a payload guy as I could be and as good a launch officer as I could be, that it all started working out for me. And so I actually got a mission assigned, and very few people knew about it. We didn't go public with it. So when an MSE flew, we kind of showed up toward the end of the public affairs events that NASA was doing. And so they would say, okay, and the crew is this, and from the Air Force, this guy. And so two of our MSEs flew. But you'll notice if you look at the mission patches, their names are like below the main symbol. And some of the NASA guys would say, well, that's so we could just, Velcro it on, tear it off. Because the NASA guys didn't necessarily like these guys who came through a different system. Suddenly they say, who's this guy and why is he here? And so there was not a lot of love between the Air Force and NASA when it came to shuttle operations, et cetera. But, I weathered through that, and I didn't make myself, like I'm going to be flying that thing. I didn't do that when I was at JSC visiting with those guys and working on it. I would just say I'm here for the program office as a representative and went about my business somewhat quietly because I didn't want to create too many antibodies in the process. And then the shuttle went down. Challenger happened, and Challenger was the tail number that I was supposed to fly. And we were going to fly high energy upper stage on our mission, in order to make it work. And I'm at this time also working in the program office. So I was working, trying to make sure that the payload was ready. So I was the guy essentially, bringing the payload information to NASA so NASA could integrate it into the shuttle, et cetera. So that was part of my job, was that mission integration and engineering integration work. And when the shuttle went down, they started reviewing all the missions that were coming up, and they started looking at what was going on. And we had a Centaur in the payload bay. And a Centaur is a liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen upper stage with, a stainless steel tank that's, it's thinner than a dime in some places. And so they say, well, that's like a flying bomb. If anything goes wrong on ascent, the payload could blow up. So now all the things that, could be evaluated for safety purposes, et cetera, was now being looked at with greater scrutiny. And the NASA missions that required Centaurs, they got canceled. The Centaur program got canceled. There was a G and the G prime. And so with no Centaur upper stage, our mission couldn't fly on a shuttle and then make it to its intended orbit. And so, and I'd been dedicating the last several years of my life to that particular payload. So I wasn't necessarily assigned to a shuttle mission. I was assigned to a specific payload mission as the payload specialist for that mission. And now that the payload isn't flying on that mission, neither am I. And so that was probably the toughest time, is when, our manifest just kind of, blew away, like smoke into the wind.
Yeah.
And the MSEs had a hard time. 2 of us had flown, and we celebrated them. But the rest of us who were kind of in line and on deck, we said, okay, where do we spend our time and energy? And so, we continued to do the work for our program offices, for the satellites we were assigned to, et cetera. And matter of fact, a lot of my class went on and became general officers. Different folks took different tacks. I got out of the Air Force a couple of years later and went to work for Boeing, and started at Boeing on Space Station down in Huntsville. And I got more time in a spacesuit in neutral buoyancy exercises and developmental work as a Boeing engineer than I did training for my own mission. And so, I was pretty happy there too. And so all the interfaces from handrails to knobs and stuff like that, I was responsible for setting those requirements and leading the requirements organization, and then doing international integration to work with the international partners. At the time, it was the Japanese and European Space Agency partners, and working on that. And then I was asked to do a little special assignment to see if there was any way we could do something with the Russians. And I was like, okay. And so, at Boeing, we had this group and started spitballing ideas. And we said, well, maybe we could do something with Mir и Svoboda. Mir, that was the Russian space station, Mir, peace. And our space station was called Freedom at the time.
Yeah.
And so Mir и Svoboda, so peace and freedom. And so we put together some thoughts, and we presented those to the chief engineer out at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. My boss presented that to the vice president at the time, Al Gore. NASA was thinking along very similar lines. It looks like they all lined up, and the program became now what is the International Space Station. So that was kind of a cool thing. And then I veered off and did some other stuff at Boeing, and work in Sea Launch program, and thing we called Aviation Information Services, putting phased array antennas on top of commercial and other airplanes so we could talk to satellites while we're flying, and stuff like that. So I had a really good fun 14 years at Boeing doing a whole bunch of different things. And I was kind of like odd job. I remember one of our VPs said, hey, Livingston, I got an idea, and it looks like we got this technology, we got that technology. I'm sure there's something we could do with those. Can you put together a little team and think about that? And so we put together a little team and we developed something, and or I'd get a call from another boss, and he goes, hey, we had a program manager that's got to go away for reasons I can't share with you, and we need you to take his program and run it. I said, I already got a pretty full. They said, yeah. And he gave me the name of the program. I said, what is it? It was an acronym. He says, you get a staff meeting tomorrow morning. They'll tell you. And so I realized I'm in charge of a classified software development program. What?
Yeah.
How does that work? And so it seemed like if there was something that, needed a little fixing or needed some energy, I'd get an assignment to go do that. And it was fun. It was, I had a great time. In the end, after 14 years, I left Boeing and went to Aerospace, spent a couple of years there. And then, Andrews had this, they would inhale, they'd get some projects, and then they'd exhale, projects would end. And, in one case, the government started canceling stuff. And I'm going, hold it, they just sent us a fax to cancel this program at their convenience. I said, unplug the fax machine, And so during one of those periods where the Air Force and other NASA were downsizing a little bit, me and Curtis Gifford spun off and we became Holder Consulting Group, later Holder Aerospace. And so we started doing kind of consulting and odd jobs and things like that for other folks in the industry. We dropped rockets from airplanes for DARPA and NASA. We did all kinds of fun stuff. We built the altitude chamber out of Midland Air and Spaceport, because we could do the math and could figure out the engineering, but could do it cheaper because we used predominantly welding industry in deep water industry personnel rather than aerospace personnel, because they knew how to make submarines really, really safe. And so building a submarine that only had to go down 33 feet, 1 atmosphere, was easy for them. Whereas if I'd asked an aerospace company to do it, it would have cost 5 times as much. And sure enough, we were the lowest bid, and we did it on time and on budget. And I found out later that the bids were about 2x. I mean, so 10x. What other bid came in about 10x what we did, and they offered less services. I mean, we did the hardware, the software, everything. And so, kind of having a fun time doing stuff. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a smattering of some of the stuff I've done. But it's not like a straight line, but each stop has been an exciting and fun one. So when I look back at my career, I say I'm truly blessed because I've had, there's some dog assignments in here every once in a while. It's like, oh, really? Yeah. But almost everything was a good opportunity to learn. I was surrounded by super smart people, really enjoyed that. And really, I just had a super fun career, even though I didn't get to fly. That's my biggest disappointment. I really wanted to fly the shuttle, but I've gotten to fly in jets. I've gotten to fly supersonic. I've gotten to do, barrel rolls and stuff in the sky. I've got to put on spacesuits and get into a neutral buoyancy test and spend so much time in there that your hands are tired at the end of each day from working the gloves that you come out and they're kind of glowing red. But and you don't want to shake anybody's hand. But it's it's just hard to imagine having a better path through life. The only thing I'd really like to do still is fly, but so I'm working on it.
So, that sounds incredible, from the academy, astronautical engineering, the International Space Station stuff as well. I mean, that is incredible. And is that, so you and Curtis worked together then? You're doing the consulting, and how did that whole journey then happen from you and Curtis collaborating to now what is Radian?
Yeah, Curtis and I met at Aerospace. As a matter of fact, he and I were hired about the same time, and I was brought in first. I'd already been interviewed, and they were going to bring me on as the vice president of space. And then Curtis was being interviewed, and Jason Andrews said, "Hey, why don't you join me on this interview with this fella?" And so I'm joining him with an interview of Curtis at a Starbucks in Issaquah, as I recall. And I'm not sure I was an employee yet, but I was really getting close to becoming an employee. And Curtis, we brought on as our business strategist. So we spent the next couple of years trying to figure out how to grow that company. And we won a couple of bids from DARPA, our first DoD wins as a company. And so Curtis and I got along pretty well professionally. We realized that we were both looking at different aspects of the same problem, and that combination was really useful. He looked at things from a business and business strategy standpoint. I would look at things from a technical and technology standpoint, and we would find the intersection of those two that created business success. And so he said, let's start our own business. And I'm going like, of course, I don't know anything about running a business. And he said, but I do. And he had a degree in astrophysics, a degree in systems engineering, and a business degree from the Darden School of Business. So I had a degree in astronautical engineering, and I had my master's in systems management from USC, so I could run engineering programs, et cetera. But it was kind of a good combination between the two of us. But he had that real strong business strength, and he could interpret my engineering direction well enough to say, okay, if we do that, it'll cost this much, it'll take this long, et cetera. And so I'll use a pejorative term, he'd interrogate me about a program in his basement. And I'd come out of there feeling exhausted. And then he would come up with this glorious program plan. And I'm going, holy smokes, how did you do that? He says, well, that's what you've been telling me over the last 4 hours. And so I put it all together, and this is what it turns into. And I said that, huh? So he had this marvelous skill of taking my chaotic information that I would see it in engineering space and putting that down into a plan that we could actually execute with schedules and budgets and performance milestones and all that stuff. And so I was like, that's a pretty good combination. And so we worked there, we together, and then one of the other founders, Jeff Feige, because we worked for him at the time when he had Orbital Outfitters building spacesuits, and so we built that altitude chamber complex for him, and he met a fellow, Richard Humphrey, who was trying to buy some X-Core vehicles to start, I'll call it a space line. And things didn't go well there, but he really wanted to do something with humans in space. And Jeff said, well, you ought to talk to Livingston. And so Richard and I got together with Jeff in New York, and we talked for a very long time. As you can tell, I could talk for a long time without breathing. And we closed the restaurant down, went to another little bar, and they eventually kicked us out. And so I'm going back to my hotel, and it's like 2 a.m, and we're crossing like in front of Madison Square Garden, and there are people everywhere, and I'm going, where am I that people are at 2 a.m. are just out, some concert or something had just let out. And I texted or called my wife, and I said, I'm just leaving and going back to, and the whole city's lit up. It's like, and she says, you're just now going back? And I said, yeah. She says, I'm so proud of you.
Yeah.
Because I never stay out late. I was like, in bed, man. I just was, and this was not my scene. But she enjoys it when I have a little fun that's out of the ordinary for me. So and so she was really happy. And we decided we'd start a business, and we called it HSF to begin with, human spaceflight, because it had to have a human aspect to it.
Yeah.
And we studied a whole bunch of different concepts in the first year. And the one that looked like it had the best operations cost in terms of per flight cost was a single stage to orbit, horizontal takeoff, horizontal landing system, which also coincided with the one that's the hardest to build. But if you could build it, you could make it work. And I had run the X-33 program for Boeing and the X-34 program. And so I knew how phenomenally difficult a single stage orbit system was. And I said, this is really, really, really hard. I'm not sure we can do it. And Richard implored me, he says, take a really good look at this. You know, technology has moved forward since the old X-ray 3 days, and see if it's more possible now. And I brought in Gary Hudson, who was just an extraordinary conceptual design fellow, and we'd worked with him before on projects with DARPA and the Air Force. And he's a unique and inventive mind. And so grabbed a couple guys like that and started crafting ideas in the single stage orbit, horizontal takeoff, horizontal landing system, kind of coalesced and looked like the best solution. Now, our first design, we didn't get everything right, but we were in the right domain. And so over time, we updated, propulsion in propellant operations and size and things like that to what you see now with Radian 1. So it took a long time. It took me almost a full year to get to the point where I kind of believed we could pull it off. And I knew that we probably didn't have all the answers right because we didn't get into enough details yet, but it looked like moving from metallic to composite structures was going to give us enough of a boost or enough of a reduction in weight that would be valuable. It looked like LOX RP engines, moving from that to methane would be enough of a boost. Hydrogen, we kind of, that was going to be the best performer, but it was going to be hard to get a hydrogen engine at our scale together without leaning on enterprises that had built those only for government activities. And so we started coalescing on different ideas and scaling the vehicle, and said, okay, we can make this close. This is what we need to do, and set about that course. And with each round of analysis and design, et cetera, we said, what do we have to prove? And so we came up with a different TPS system rather than the shuttle's TPS because it was a little more fragile than we wanted. So we put that hardware, we built some panels, put it into test. And matter of fact, we should be finishing up our test of EDU 1A this week. We're waiting on a piece of equipment on the ground test gear to get repaired. And so we could demonstrate critical elements of what we needed early enough to give us confidence to keep moving forward. And so that's what we've been doing, a lot of risk reduction activity in the near term. So it's been a wild ride. What was your question?
Love that. It's amazing. I love it. And it'd be great, just sticking on the Radian story, is that if you could, of course I know, but if you could tell listeners about what do Radian do, and how do you see you guys fitting into the overall space ecosystem, and also on that note, it'd be good to understand from you, how do you see the kind of the current landscape, the current status of that space exploration / space cargo sector, and how do you feel that will evolve over the next 5 to 10 years, and what part do you see Radian spaceplane playing in all of this?
Yeah, so let's talk about Radian. What the thing we wanted Radian to be able to do was to fly and fly often. We've often talked about airplane-like operations with space systems, but we haven't actually been able to achieve it. And with the space plane approach, you have a form factor that has the best chance of achieving true airplane-like operations. And by airplane-like operations, I mean, you fly the system, you land the system, you put propellant in the system, you fly the system, you land the system. And so, airplanes, you put fuel in the wings, you put passengers inside, you fly, you land, you get rid of the passengers, you've burned off the fuel, you put more fuel in, you clean the plane, you put passengers in, you fly again. And so when you start looking at that operation, you say, wow, you can become very efficient if you can achieve that. With a vertical rocket, you can land, but you can't land the whole thing back together again. So, there's a little sign that says some assembly required, or reassembly required. So you've got to get it from where it landed to a place where you can reassemble it and make sure that all the things that disconnected, reconnected are verified. And then you can take it back to its launch site and do it again. And because you can reuse the booster usually, you can save an enormous amount of money. Well, that's a really, really good model. The only thing that could be better than that is being able to use the whole thing over and again. And with us, that's our objective from the start.
Yeah.
And so we want to be able to launch. If somebody says, I have a national need and I want to be flying in 90 minutes from the time I say go, we can sit a bird, and keep propellants chilled in it, running, and you say go, and 90 minutes later I'll be in the sky. And so that's the type of responsiveness we're looking at. You should be able to launch the same bird within 48 hours after it lands. And so what do you have to do to check it out? You can launch an airplane, 15, 20 minutes after it lands, as long as you've got enough propellant on board and change people. People are probably the slowest. People in baggage are probably the slowest part of that whole operation.
Yeah.
But you can launch pretty quickly. So we're trying to push those types of numbers. And with a single stage to orbit, we said, well, how much can we get to orbit? We said, well, what orbit do we want to get to? Well, if you want to get to space station, which is where the action is in terms of carrying people and cargo back and forth, you can get about 5 people and about 5,000 pounds of cargo up to that orbit. That's a fairly highly inclined orbit. It's LEO, but it's a little bit high LEO. So we kind of set those parameters as targets and said, okay, well, what can you bring home? Because right now everybody's limited by what they can stuff into a capsule and how much cargo they can bring. And we said, well, because we're in an airplane, had to fly our way up, we can actually bring more stuff down than you can take up. So we can bring about 10,000 pounds of stuff home. So we said, okay, now we got an airplane. It looks like it's got capability. Does that capability generate revenue? And so I'm on the technical side of things. And I said, so I think this is what I can make work. And the business guys, Curtis and the other team members say, okay, where does this fall? What are the key markets? Well, space transportation is clearly one. So you can take stuff up and deliver payloads and stuff like that. Space operations, you could fly a mission that's got like a payload in the bay that never leaves the payload bay. And it could be a satellite looking at weather. It could be a satellite looking at a volcano erupting with a hyperspectral sensor and seeing where the cloud, you could, let's say there's a natural disaster or a nuclear disaster somewhere, and you can fly up with a hyperspectral payload and see where the cloud that you can't see with your eyes is floating toward and what areas are at risk. But you can do it quickly, and you don't have to launch something or have something on orbit all the time looking for that. You can help space stations become real because commercial folks say, well, the International Space Station is great if you're a government, but I want to do a commercial space station. I want to put it in a different orbit. I want to do this with it, that with it. Well, the transportation element for making that space station work, that's a job for Radian. If you want to take up the big chunks, the big cargo modules and things like that, you're going to launch on something else, something that can take big mass to orbit. But there's this infrastructure that always goes back and forth, and I liken it to building a building. When you build a building, you don't bring the entire building on a truck. You'll have big trucks carrying big pieces like beams and structures, things like that. But then you have a ton of little trucks bringing in sheetrock. These are panel vans, electricians with wires, et cetera, and all the cabling that has to go in and piping, plumbing. And so all these little trucks are making trips back and forth. The big trucks bringing the big beams and things like that, they're less frequent. But you need them all in order to make this work. And then you have to have the workers. The workers don't necessarily come in the panel van unless that's what they're delivering, but they may come to the job site in their own cars. They come in pickup trucks, et cetera. So you see this great diversity of transportation systems required to build large infrastructures, everything from houses to skyscrapers to football stadiums. And so you see this, this diversity of transportation systems all applied to doing something unique and wonderful. And we're one of the pieces of that. We're the part that can carry the crew back and forth. We can carry, I'll say, the sheetrock or the wiring that you need for it that isn't part of the module that you have already. But we're that piece of the infrastructure that goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to make the building of the larger edifice, if you will, possible. So so that's kind of our space, because we see a lot of rockets getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're good for the infrastructure parts. But if you want to just take a few people back and forth, you don't want to take them in a cruise ship. You're gonna want a smaller dinghy or something to go back and forth to shore with. And so we're the intermediate transportation system that provides frequent both crew and cargo back and forth to destinations that that people are devising right now. So that's kind of the space I see us in, and it's kind of filling a gap that really isn't well filled right now. And so I think that there's opportunity for us to do that. And so when you look at Radian, we can do stuff that others can't. We're seeing efforts to do satellite refueling and propellant transfer robotically, but that could be made easier with a system that could carry up the fuel tank, deploy it, transfer it, bring back the empty, things like that. So we'll start looking at operations that need to happen in space as the LEO economy and infrastructure grows, and saying, okay, how do you do that? Is there a way to do it with an expendable rocket or partially reusable rocket? Does the cost of that make sense? Or can I take a little bit of a smaller payload on a completely reusable rocket and maybe some crew to help out? And does that work? And so when you start looking at the different operations that happen in space, I think a lot of them will like the fact that you've got flexibility, frequency, and a crew when you want it to help out your operations. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think the other thing that will happen is that people will ask us if we can do something that we hadn't thought of. We'll put together our business plan or a roadmap, and this is what our mission capabilities are. And somebody will say, "Can you?" And every time somebody said, "Can you?" and I've looked at it, says, "Oh, let's run the math on that." And the answer is always coming back, "Yes, we can." And they say, "Oh, that's good for us." And said, "Who are you? This is what we want to do in space." And so I think that there are enterprises that have ideas of what they'd like to do in space, but a flexible transportation system is required to enable their vision. And I think we're that enabling function. We're kind of like the catalyst to their success. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that appears as the idea of frequent transportation to and from space becomes more a real thought in somebody else, as opposed to spaces for communication satellites and a few astronauts. So as people start thinking about, well, what can I do operationally, I think once their imagination starts to grow, they'll really need us even more. So
yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. It's like you guys are creating a commercial airline for space cargo.
Yeah. And think about this. The shuttle carried a lot of different astronauts. So when we start looking at how many people flew in space, when the shuttle became operational, the numbers started to skyrocket. People got multiple flights, and so there were lots of humans flying to space. And that tapers off, after the shuttle era, but we've still got a consistency. But what I think the shuttle did for us is it opened up our eyes to the realm of possibilities. And without something that is operationally, repeatably flying frequently, some of that aspirational stuff that the shuttle opened our eyes to is kind of closed down a little bit. And I think what Radian does is it opens it back up and starts to expand it beyond even the dreams of the shuttle, because the shuttle was expensive to operate. So our objective is to get that operations cost down so that we're not limited by that. We're only limited by the imagination of those who want to expand the space economy and space infrastructure, et cetera. So we want to enable those types of entrepreneurs and those types of enterprises. So we're an enabler.
My mind's been blown. I feel like I can talk to you about this all day now. I have so many questions, but I want to be mindful of your time. The two things I would love to know, and I think you maybe answered one already, was that are you guys going to look at potentially taking people up on this space plane at some point?
Oh, absolutely.
As well as cargo and payloads.
Carries 5 people to an ISS type of orbit.
Okay.
And 5,000 pounds. So we're people are built into the system.
Okay, and those parts that you mentioned, when the vehicle returns back down and lands, you mentioned that there's a part of the subassembly that is lost. There's other bits.
Nope.
So it's completely reusable. So there's
completely reusable.
Right. Okay.
So if you've got a picture of us,
yeah.
My model in the background's too difficult to see, okay. But we fly on a sled, and and let's see if I can deep blur. This is probably, I don't know how well this will work on your thing, but real-time adjustment to our plan here.
Wow.
Okay, so you see we've got a sled underneath us.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see that well.
I can see. Yeah.
Okay, and what that sled does is right now it's got 3 engines on the back, and they help accelerate the system to get it to flight velocity sooner. And so it'll take about 26 seconds or so of the 5 big engines on the back of the space plane and the 3 engines on the sled all firing once, 8 engines firing once, about 550 or so thousand pounds of thrust per engine. And so this thing gets to about Mach 0.7. Okay, so we're not supersonic yet, but we're just, we're just sub-transonic or really transonic. And then the top part takes off and flies. The sled gets, reeled back to its starting position, and we put the propellants back in the tanks for it. And it waits for the vehicle to come home, or it takes the next vehicle up. But the thing that flies on top, it all comes back. And it comes back just as you see it. So it doesn't, it doesn't drop things. It doesn't, have to get things reconstituted. It all comes back. And because it all comes back, all you have to do, I just love that simplification. For anything rocket scientist, if somebody says all you have to do, be suspicious. But what you have to do next is inspect it, make sure everything is in good working order, reload the propellants, and get it ready to go again. Yeah. Anything that you've used, oxygen, nitrogen, methane, whatever you've expended, those tanks need to be refilled. But then you get ready to go. You might want to let your crew get some rest. So the beauty of this is there's not a lot of new assembly required. When you get to the sled again, you have to attach the umbilicals and the hold downs. And so you have some mechanical attachments, some electrical attachments, et cetera, and some propellant attachments. And you recouple those items and then you go. That's what we do in those 48 hours is inspect it, refurbish it, refuel it, so to speak, and get ready to go, and change the flight profile on the computer. What we're doing next.
Is there like a Aeropod system on that for going, if you go to the ISS and you're taking people and you're dropping things off at the ISS, is there some sort of like Aeropod system there to like connect to the ISS to then unload the payload?
Yeah, we have a standby. Yeah, I had some models built to help people understand how we work. Yeah. And they come in handy because I can wave my arms and we can show diagrams, but sometimes that's not as is effective. Okay, so this is the front end of our vehicle.
Right.
Okay, hopefully you can see that. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's got a payload bay. Okay, and we can. I'm going to de-blur it at the risk of showing stuff behind me. Okay, so in the payload bay, this is kind of our payload bay volume.
Yeah.
Okay, and so we can put anything we want to in that payload bay. One of the things you can put in the payload bay is a docking adapter and tunnel.
Right.
And so that allows you to go up and dock to the space station and transfer people and cargo. And then you still got space behind it.
Yeah.
And so in the space behind it, you can put other cargo. And in that case, this cargo has got a little a thing that you can grab with a remote manipulator, and you can take it out. And this one actually is a free flyer that can fly, and it you can't see it on detail, but it's carrying, I think, about 36 6U small sats. And so it's got its own little propulsion system, so it can fly to a spot in space, and it can wait until you need those little satellites, and then it can deploy those. Then it can go to a different spot. So if you want to use small sats or very small ones, you can kind of load them here and then fly them to a spot and then deploy them when you need them. If they've got a short lifetime or limited range, you can wait until you do need them because you're going to do some sort of space operation where they're required. So you've got a docking adapter, and I'm going to do one more thing here. This is a little bit unorthodox.
So I guess if you're not doing human payload missions, you don't need the docking adapter. It means that you've got even more room for other cargo.
Look at that! You've got it exactly. And so now, if I can figure out how to put this part back in. So now I'm just going to hold it in place here because I've got it a little askew. So now let's say I've got a mission that I want to put a telescope in. That telescope can be a celestial observation scope. So I'll just point the entire craft where you want to look at. There's a supernova going off, or we see something that we think is going to be an event far away. Perhaps there's going to be something that happens on Jupiter. Is some of its moons cross in front of it, and there's scientific data we want to get as that happens. And so you want to do it from space, or you want to look at the Earth. A volcano has gone off, and you want to see where's the cloud, and you want to observe it from space. But the space assets that you have right this minute aren't in the exact same spot that you want to observe. So you fly this up, and you put it where you want it to see it from, and observe it that way. So this gives you enormous flexibility on what you want to do. You can devise a mission, create a Radian payload module that fits in it mechanically, electrically, from a data standpoint, thermal standpoint, will fit in that payload bay and operate. And when the vehicle comes home, you take out what you put in there before, and you plug in your new one, and you go do that mission. And what that does is it says that volume that is available to you, the power and the weight, et cetera, this becomes the black box in which you can put whatever you can imagine into. And now your mission is our mission. Our mission is it's your mission operating. And so it gives you enormous flexibility of what you can do when you're on orbit, and what you can bring back. You may say, okay, I've got a satellite and I'm really testing this one piece of it. I've got a new guidance system, or I've got a new optical system, and I really want to test this in space. And I can do a lot of simulation on Earth, and I can do vacuum chambers and all kinds of stuff, but I need the range that this thing is going to see from in space. So I want to take it to space. So you take it up in the cargo bay, you drop it off, you leave it, and you let it operate for a while. And the next Radian mission comes and picks it back up. And you've been collecting data on it and says, okay, this piece of my major system, which is going to be part of my new, much, much larger enterprise, I know it works because I've tested in a relevant environment. And so I didn't have to fake it and hope it worked by testing on the ground in 1G and in a thermal environment. And, you know, I can actually just put it out there and see if it really works. We can stay up there while you're testing it and just bring it back. We can let it go and let it run for weeks till we come back while we do something else somewhere else. So, you know, so you start thinking about that. And of course, there's just not one vehicle. You know, so when you go to the bus stop or the train station, you know, the train you hop on is scheduled for that time, but it's not necessarily the same train that you took yesterday or the same bus that you took yesterday. It all depends on where they are in the rotation. Or if you go to the station at a different time than you did yesterday, but you know that there's another train leaving in the next, 20 minutes, you can catch it to the same destination because it's gonna go to the same place. It's on a schedule. So you've got the flexibility to do on-demand, scheduled operations, et cetera. It kind of opens up a whole new world of operations. You know.
Unbelievable. So. Incredible. Livingston, this has been amazing. Thank you so much